We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast on a Tuesday, 10:30 Eastern Time, coming to you live on rumble.com/amradpod. Also on YouTube, the American Radicals Podcast. We come to you every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, 10:30 on the Eastern Seaboard. Also, like to drop the audio format of the show on iTunes and iHeart and Spotify after we get done recording. So wherever you are, whenever you are, do all the things. That could be giving us a thumbs up, a like, a follow, a share, a subscribe. Again, do all the things. We appreciate it as always, as we try to trick those algorithms, convincing those algorithms to share the podcast as far and wide so we can radicalize more Americans into our way of thinking on this hobbyist podcast. Have to issue the qualifier. It is a hobbyist podcast. I'm just here as an American citizen exercising his First Amendment right to share my opinion on things that are open source, things that are in the news, and not giving away anything that's classified material, and definitely under no circumstances representing any particular agency, department, bureau, arm of the federal government of the United States of America. And without further ado, let's get to this hobbyist podcast. What are we going to be talking about today? Today, I want to talk about nesting doll news is how I'm going to be labeling it. You ever seen one of those Russian dolls, those nesting dolls? You just keep opening it up and digging deeper and deeper, and there's just always another doll on the inside. We're going to dig in it like it's an onion. There just seems to be so much more when you actually get into the meat of these stories that are out there today that are not originally getting to the people that just read the headline or the sub-headline and then click share. They're not actually getting out of it what I think that is actually there. So we're going to try to do that. And what are we going to try to do it on? Well, we're going to do it on an illegal alien sob story and then also a scare tactic that comes from our mainstream news. The Donald Trump auto pen scandal. Yeah, not Joe Biden, not the human Roomba. Now Donald Trump part 2, the mean orange, literally Hitler president, has his own auto pen scandal. There's a polygraph drama going on over at the FBI. Democrats, not Republicans, seem to appreciate Americans' data center revolt that's going on across the country. The left is crying about not murdering babies in Africa. There's SNAP fraud, and it's worse than it was originally reported. And now that it's being reported, it's even worse. Trust me, we'll have to dig into that a bit. More talk about some stimmy checks coming off of tariffs we'll have to unpack. And then also an update on meat allergies. And spoiler alert, I was right. We'll get to the end of the entire story and we'll have to dig in and find out, as always, I was right. It'll be a good time. Thanks again for everybody for being along with us for the ride today on the American Radicals Podcast. Before we get to all those stories, let's thank our underwriting sponsor, affiliate, supporter of the day. It's going to be the OG sponsor, affiliate, supporter of the day, because we don't take any money on this hobbyist podcast. We just support American business. And today's American business that is worth supporting 100% is the True Earth Pharmacy. Everybody go to trueearth.co, trueearth.co. You don't need the M. Don't get confused by the double E in the middle of that URL. When you go there, you can find out all about the different fertilizers that they have, the deep ocean powdered fertilizer selection that is available to you as you might be trying to grow your own garden, figuring out how you're going to go about planting in the upcoming spring once you get through this winter of doom and despair, unless you're in Florida where it's nice and 75 and sunny today. Sorry, George Hill. And also you can get personally healthy at the True Earth Pharmacy. Check out the pharmacy spelled with an F. Lots of personal supplements there. I could testify to the black turmeric and the turmeric trio. It's been huge for me, getting rid of a lot of the inflammation that I experience as a result of putting lots of miles on my ankles. Take that nice eyedropper, 1 per day, down the hatch. the pain subsided. So if you got some aches and pains, maybe some trouble concentrating, relaxing, maybe you got a pet who's got some maladies, all of it available in the pharmacy section. And don't forget, we have a proprietary code, which is AMRAD25, because we're getting healthy in 2025. AMRAD25. It gets you 10% off everything in the store, and that's at trueearth.co. And we can now move on to the news we're going to be digging into. We've got all across the board, lots of different sources of it, but we're going to have to begin with the New York Times, which was at one point a newspaper, to get to stories that they've got a couple about illegal aliens, which they characterize as immigrants. But the big story was headline: she was deported in error. Her child was left behind. So we're going to go to the sob story. I remember cautioning everyone after the election a year ago that these stories were already written. They were going to be telling you about the abuelas who suffered from type 2 diabetes and had to have their legs amputated, and their great-grandchild was working 3 jobs, off the books, of course, under the table, to pay for that dialysis treatment that abuela needed. And don't you want to keep that family together? And I said at the time, gird your loins. The sob stories were coming. You're just going to have to muscle on through it and say, no, you have to go march down to the southern border and leave the country. So there is a launching off point for this sob story, because this woman, per the New York Times, at one point a newspaper, she was deported in error. Her name is Maribel Lopez. Now, she's been separated from her children since early September, when federal agents raided the nutrition bar factory where she worked in central New York. Now, Ms. Lopez was detained and deported to Guatemala, leaving behind her 2-year-old son. Now, the sob story is for the son, but if you actually paid attention, it mentioned children. Now, stick with me, because that's going to be important. Maribel Lopez was supposed to be protected from deportation because she had a pending asylum case that was being appealed. Her original appeal for asylum was rejected, but she found a nice communist attorney to file for an appeal. And that meant that there was a stay on her, and she was going to get to stay in the United States until it was determined whether or not she was going to get asylum or have to go back to Guatemala. Now, she fled Guatemala because she feared for her life. She sought asylum in the United States because of political unrest, maybe a natural disaster. No, she had an abusive husband, which I feel bad about. I don't want any woman to get beat up. But does that entitle you to flee from Guatemala all the way through Latin America, into North America, cross over the Mexican-American border, and get to stay here and not just reside close to the border, maybe talk to a judge who's there? No, you get to go all the way to New York State. Because according to the New York Times, at one point in the newspaper, we should feel really bad for Maribel Lopez because her old man was tuning her up in Guatemala in 2018. You think maybe the danger is past? Do you think maybe she could go back and find a support network of her country? No, she gets to stay here, according to the New York Times. So throw that back up there. Immigration officials say that parents who are being deported are given the option of bringing their children who were born in the United States with them. And Maribel gave birth to her son, Jorge, 2 years ago, after she had an accidental pregnancy where the father was yet another illegal alien. So she brought 2 illegal kids with her. Then she gave birth to a third, who's an anchor baby, and daddy hit the road. So she's now got a third child, no support network, still living in New York State, and she wants to be on the American dole. Ms. Lopez says she was offered no choice to take her illegal alien anchor baby with her. She was separated. And as a result, Jorge was left in the care of her 2 adult children. So she brought in 2 children who were illegal aliens. Now they're adults, taking care of her baby while she was removed, but she got brought back. Now, Ms. Lopez was referred to a legal clinic right after she tried to get asylum. And according to medical and police reports, as well as testimonials from family members that are attached to her 44-page asylum court filing, she details how she endured brutal, unrelenting abuse for years. And again, like, I'm being a little bit tongue in cheek and sarcastic. I don't want Maribel Lopez to get beat up. I don't want her ex-partner to have another crack at her. But there's nothing that says if she goes back to Guatemala, she has to go back into the same house as him. This is digging into the story, right? They want you to read that headline to find out that she was wrongly deported and then had to be turned around and brought back, which she was. I guess there was a pending asylum order, and the Department of Homeland Security erroneously took her away and then corrected it and brought her back so she could have her BS asylum hearing and find out just how much she gets to stay in America because she made bad life choices almost a decade ago and shacked up with an abusive husband. Now, in early 2023, Maribel Lopez discovered after she had this unplanned pregnancy, the father was undocumented, as according to the New York Times, at one point a newspaper. He's gone, and now she is dealing with the aftermath. She will remain detained until her immigration case is decided. Now, hopefully, we will get a judge who's commonsensical enough to look at the entire situation and realize that Maribel Lopez has made some bad life decisions and then some illegal ones. She came to America illegally. She could claim that she wanted asylum all she wanted. She didn't show up at the border and say, I need asylum. She snuck across. And then when she got caught, she said, now I need sanctuary because the guy who I fled from is back at the country, even though I've had no contact with him for 7 years. You would hope that maybe she'd had some sort of a support network in order to get from Guatemala to the United States. Maybe she could lean on them when she gets sent back home with not one, not two, but all three of her kids. Because I don't believe in separating families. I think all the illegals should go. And that's the story. The sob story. They're going to try to get you a case of the feels. You feel bad for her. Why can't she just stay here, Steve? Now, if that doesn't work, we're going to have to go to the fear mongering, which the New York Times is very happily and ably going to bring you, which is another big story that came out from the New York Times, at one point a newspaper. The headline here: Homeland Security missions falter amid the focus on deportations. Because now the New York Times will say that they're all on board for federal law enforcement, unless, of course, we have Black Lives Matter in the streets. But we'll find out more here from this piece, where it says that DHS has diverted thousands of federal agents from their normal duties to focus on arresting undocumented immigrants, illegal aliens. Homeland Security investigators, HSI, that's the 1811 component. Those are the special agents from Department of Homeland Security. They worked approximately 33% fewer hours on child exploitation. So, in the effort to fulfill their prime directive of protecting the border and apprehending illegal aliens, the New York Times is really upset and sad that federal investigators could have been shifted over from working on child exploitation, i.e., child sexual abuse material, i.e., kiddie porn cases. Now, I'm wondering, did Alan Feuer over at the New York Times, who was trademarked, I guess, the suspendables term, the nom de plume that we have embraced, the one who pointed out that I was a so-called whistleblower, not really serious. Was he on record before crying about federal law enforcement officers being moved off of child exploitation matters to chase down grandmothers who committed misdemeanor trespassing offenses at worst, or more than likely, were the victims of a government put-up job when the government put a fake pipe bomb down and said that this was terrorism in the Capitol on January 6, 2021? Is the New York Times reporting on that? No. No, this is the real story. The real story is that the New York Times is just shilling on behalf of illegal aliens because they feel bad, or they want, more likely, to have millions and millions of them in this country so that there will be no other alternative than a federal response, which will be amnesty for them. But we'll go back to the piece, because it's not limited to just crying about child sexual abuse material not being worked, because temporarily those agents, those criminal investigators from Homeland Security investigations, are going out and apprehending illegal aliens, which is part of their jobs and responsibilities. And look, there's a finite amount of resources. I even acknowledged at the time when I was with the FBI and moved off of child pornography investigations to domestic terrorism. Now, the domestic terrorism threat wasn't true, but I don't think you can argue that 30, 40, 50 million illegal aliens who streamed across our border during the Joe Biden administration is a current existential threat, which Homeland Security should take up. But the New York Times wants to make sure that, that it's not just limited to the child exploitation. No, no, no. They're also going to talk to you about these intelligence offices, which are focusing on supporting immigration enforcement rather than other security issues. And what could those be? Well, since the immigration crackdown, cases where officials worked to seize tankers loaded with Iranian oil and bank accounts where profits were stored have languished for months. So now the New York Times is concerned about an Iranian funding terrorism threat. Didn't the New York Times decry the bombing of the facilities that they said definitely 100% were not being used to make nuclear bombs by Iran? Didn't the New York Times get all on board with the Obama administration trying to sign a treaty with Iran so that they could get nukes and dismiss any sort of funding of terrorism? No, no, that's a neocon conspiracy. Well, now the New York Times is worried about the Department of Homeland Security investigating funding of Iranian terrorism. And beyond that, you have FLETC, which is FLETC. That stands for the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. That's in Brunswick, Georgia. That's where lots of different federal law enforcement agencies send their personnel to do a baseline criminal investigator training. Tribal police go there. U.S. Secret Service does for a time. The air marshals do for a time. Then they specialize. Really, the only two agencies within the federal government that don't use FLETC are the FBI and the DEA. They have standalone facilities, but everybody else goes down there. And according to the New York Times here, FLETC is focusing on bringing and matriculating agents, immigration agents and officers through their doors and getting them pushed out there so that they can go and forward and apprehend and deport lots of illegal aliens. But as a result of that, the other agencies aren't getting their people through there. So now we're worried about getting more police out there. I thought they were all about defunding the police. They were talking about how the death of fentanyl overdose of St. George Floyd necessitated us rethinking law enforcement entirely in this country 5 years ago. Perhaps we shouldn't have anybody. We should just have professional social workers. But now we've just done a 180, almost a photo negative. It's almost as if you dig into these pieces, they give away what they're truly intending to do, and that's either through scaring you or pulling on your heartstrings, getting you on board with illegal aliens flooding across the country and never being addressed. Now, the piece here, again, I'll close it out before we pivot away. They give you some of the stats. They really want to bring you back to their side, their way of thinking here. Now, according to the New York Times, fewer than 40% of people detained by ICE have a criminal conviction. Well, that means that 4 in 10 of them have committed a crime that's been fully adjudicated and convicted in the United States of America. That doesn't say anything about the other 6 in 10 who have not had their cases adjudicated fully. I mean, why is law enforcement interfacing with them? Many of the times they've committed a crime. They just haven't been convicted of it yet. That's just a small detail that the New York Times leads away. And let's not forget the fact that 100%, 10 in 10 of them crossed our border illegally. Now, that's a civil issue federally. It's not a criminal issue. We don't send you to jail. We just kick you out of the country. But we're going to try to get that distinction in there. Well, 6 in 10 of them are just not violent. We should just let them be here, even though they violated our laws in this country. The very first thing they did by walking across the border was violating federal law in the United States. But the New York Times wants to make sure that you don't pay attention to that fact. You're only concerned about them being violent. Again, they might have been violent and just not convicted yet. That hasn't really been distinguished in this story by the New York Times. They also want to say that Homeland Security says that it's deported more than 500,000 people with a daily pace of removals reaching levels not seen since the Obama administration. So we should be really worried about how many illegals, how successfully and efficiently Department of Homeland Security is at removing these people. So roughly 550,000 people would mean we're on pace for 750,000 in the calendar year, which would mean that we're going to get less than 4 million deportations total And that's the story. That's where you're digging in. That's where you're pulling back the layers of the onion and you see actually what's there. We have a inefficient and unsuccessful deportation effort currently afoot here. For all the advertising we're seeing and for all the cable news hits that are elected officials that purport to be on the conservative side, the Republican side, the people that are all on board with the mandate that the American people sent a year ago at the ballot box when they voted not just through the Electoral College, but democratically. Donald Trump won the popular vote. And one of the top issues for him was illegal immigration. And people voted, and their voices were heard. And Donald Trump, who's mean, orange, and literally Hitler, became president again on the backs of a message that he was going to do mass deportations of illegal aliens. And we are on track to deport less than 4 million during his second administration. That's the story to me, because I actually did the reading here. And one final thought that I can't help but just be stunned and floored by was that the New York Times, in its last-ditch effort to toss up that Hail Mary and get you to their side, they throw out 9/11, September 11, 2001. They overhaul the Department of Homeland Security into this deportation army. Has now, according to them, it's a behemoth agency that Congress created in response to September 11th, but it has a striking departure from what it originally was intended to do. And as the last quarter century has shown us, I guess what it's been constructed to do as a behemoth agency is to make air travel impossible for regular people and entrap Americans into terrorist plots that they were never predisposed or capable of carrying out. And now that they've been reconfigured to actually do what the United States government should be doing, which is actually part of its few, very finite number of responsibilities that are listed out in that pesky, dusty old document known as the Constitution, is to protect the borders. And since it's doing that, that's a problem from the New York Times. All right, we can move off of the illegal aliens and Department of Homeland Security, and we should talk about this matter, which I think was a story over the weekend and coming into this week, and it's drama related to the FBI and use of polygraphs for its employees. Now, I'm not going to belabor it too long, but I do think it's worth going into because it's newsworthy and also an indication of how the background processes during the vetting are not necessarily what people think they are, and that is the story. Now, over the weekend, co-deputy director of the FBI, Dan Bongino, took to social media, as he's wont to do, as he loves to do, and he wanted to confront a story. And the story, as he posted, came from the Daily Mail. I'm not going to read his entire multiple paragraph response. I will, however, read the very beginning of it, because tell me that you care about something without telling me that you care about something will actually tell me that you don't care about it. Here's what I mean. Quote, I'm sincerely sorry for wasting your time on a weekend with nonsensical media fairy tales, and I do realize the act of addressing this puts even more eyes on it. However, ... Sir, shut your mouth on this issue. You have now told everyone that this matters deeply to you by trying to tell them that it doesn't matter to you. Now, what matters to you? What is the actual story? Because the story isn't that big, and you've made it into a big story. Now, the news piece that came from the Daily Mail, and again, we're going to be digging in to show you what it really means and how it is a misrepresentation to a certain extent, but both sides do what's called lying by omission. Now, the Daily Mail reported, headline, Kash Patel hired deputy FBI director with no background check in extraordinary vetting breach. Well, that sounds awful. Now, according to the piece from Daily Mail, which is derivative of a different piece that we'll get to, FBI Director Kash Patel signed waivers that allowed his second in command, FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino, in addition to two other recent senior FBI hires, to avoid polygraph exams typically required for top officials. Now, FBI spokesman Ben Williamson suggested that the three senior officials were, quote, not required to take the lie detector tests since the roles are for political appointees. However, the FBI's own eligibility guidelines note that all workers must get a top secret clearance to work at the department, and the preliminary employment requirements include a polygraph exam. Well, where's the story here? A couple of different angles. It's a policy which is subject to change. So you, as the director of the FBI, could maybe work with the Department of Justice in order to amend the policy. There's definitely an unprecedented component to hiring outside of the FBI when it comes to a deputy director, which they've now done 2 times, not just for Dan Bongino, but for co-deputy director Bailey from Missouri, Andrew Bailey. Now, I don't know if he was forced to take a polygraph examination, but what we have here from this reporting is, and the headline is deceptive. No background check? That sounds disturbing. You do need to have a high security clearance in order to be in the upper echelon of leadership in the FBI. Now, the story is derivative from a piece that comes from ProPublica, which is a little bit more honest in its headline. And when you dig into it, you find out some more facts. Now, from ProPublica, the headline, FBI Director Kash Patel waived polygraph security screening for Dan Bongino. Oh, so it's not a waiving of the background check. It's a waiving of the polygraph, a waiving of the lie detector. But that doesn't mean they didn't do a security check beyond that. It didn't mean that he didn't have to fill out the standard Form 86, which is like 200 pages where you give your full background and they have professional background checkers go and vet it out and make sure you're not lying. So Daily Mail did embellish. And then co-deputy director Bongino made a big hullabaloo about being accused of not taking a background check and omitted the fact that, yes, it is in fact true. He didn't take a polygraph exam. And it's a little bit like saying, well, I've been accused of having an affair on my wife, when really all that was reported was you were in the company of another woman. Does that mean you're having an affair? Well, no. I mean, you could be in the company of another woman with your shirt off if she's your doctor and she's got the stethoscope on your chest and she's checking, make sure that you can breathe and your heart's beating. So there's these omissions of facts that you actually have to read into the details of to find out if there in fact is even a scam here. So let's actually dig into it and find out what the nature of this dispensation that the co-deputy director got from the polygraph was. And then actually there's some other things in there that I think are kind of a big deal. And if you didn't read it, you wouldn't know. So from ProPublica, which did a long piece on this one, and I had to read all the way through it to get a couple of different details. And that led me to even more digging of details back at the New York Times, at one point a newspaper, but stand by for that. So what we find out is that the director of the FBI, Kash Patel, waived the polygraph security screening for Dan Bongino. That's his right. That's his purview to do it. And a polygraph takes you like 30 minutes. So I don't understand why they would be concerned about it if it was a time management thing. And certainly I don't have any reason to doubt that Dan Bongino would have passed a polygraph. So it seems like kind of a self-own if there is a story here. Now, people familiar with the matter say that Dan Bongino's ascent to the position without passing a standard background check was unprecedented. So he didn't pass a standard background check. Didn't mean they didn't do a background check. They just did a background check without a polygraph. So now we're playing with the word games and both sides are sniping back and forth at each other. Now, there were 2 other officials who got the same dispensation. That was Marshall Yates and Nicole Rucker. I'm not going to go into those 2. They're not really relevant to what we're talking about today. And the quotation that we got, again, from Ben Williamson, who is the spokesperson for the FBI, a quote is, "It is false that the individuals you referenced failed polygraphs." But they weren't accused of failing polygraphs. The reporting was that there wasn't one administered. So now we have a spokesperson answering a question, or at least an accusation, that was never actually proffered. The FBI has recently used polygraphs to ask senior employees if they have said anything negative about Kash Patel or had spoken to the media. Wait, what? That's buried in there pretty deep. Let me read that again. Again, this comes from ProPublica. Headline is, FBI Director Kash Patel waived polygraph security screening for Dan Bongino, 2 other senior staff. This is buried in there deep, and this should raise alarm bells, at least until you dig even deeper. The quote from ProPublica is, "The FBI has recently used the polygraph to ask senior employees if they have said anything negative about Patel." Have you ever said something bad about your boss? Is the FBI using a security check, a 5-year security check, which is normal and is actually an obligation if you're an employee of the FBI, to flesh out if you've ever uttered something bad about your boss? That seems really grossly inappropriate. Is this a purge afoot? This should be the headline. Not, oh, well, we gave him a polygraph or we didn't give him a polygraph, and it doesn't really matter. The story is this. Are you actually doing a loyalty test? Have you ever said anything bad about your boss? I mean, define bad. Well, I don't like his hairstyle. Or I think he made a catastrophic decision on XYZ. That needed to be brought forward during a lie detector test to ascertain whether or not you're eligible to hold a security clearance, i.e., eligible to work in the building. That's a massive story. How is that not leading? How is that not the headline? Well, because I had to go to the New York Times at one point in the newspaper to find out it really kind of wasn't. So the his headline, the FBI is using polygraphs to test officials' loyalty. It's all the way back several months ago. So it eluded my attention, I think probably for a good reason. Now, this one gives you a little bit more. In interviews and polygraph tests, the FBI has asked senior employees whether they have said anything negative about Mr. Patel, according to two people with knowledge of the questions and others familiar with similar accounts. In one instance, officials were forced to take a polygraph as the agency sought to determine who disclosed to the news media that Mr. Patel had demanded a service weapon, an unusual request given that he is not an agent. So the New York Times is going to issue some dirt out there. Again, who wrote this? It'll be some hack. Scroll through. Yeah, it's Adam Goldman, and it's from July of 2025. So he exists to basically just throw shade on Kash Patel and the FBI because they work for Donald Trump, who's mean, orange, and literally Hitler. But that's not good either. So you're telling me that it was revealed and kind of buried in the New York Times that Kash Patel got himself issued a service pistol by the FBI? That's kind of another headline. I don't know why we didn't get that. But when you actually read through it, you find out that former polygraphers suggested that the question asking employees whether they had said anything negative about Mr. Patel were probably devised to be what is known as a control question. Oh, so now we got to educate you a little bit on taking a polygraph if you haven't already. When you take a polygraph, it's typically 7-8 questions long. Now, they will administer control questions in there. Not every question is relevant to what they're trying to ascertain. And you don't go in cold. You sit down, the polygrapher lets you know what the questions are going to be ahead of time because they want to actually generate a response. If you're anticipating getting that question that you're going to lie about, theoretically, it's going to show on the test. But they want to get a baseline for you, so they will actually make you, in a practice test, tell a deliberate lie. And they're all yes or no questions. It's not like you're extrapolating, you're monologuing like you're on some sort of hobbyist podcast, which you can find on YouTube at the American Radicals Podcast or on Rumble at rumble.com/amradpod. They ask you very specific questions, yes or no questions. And they'll say, all right, write down a number 1 through 5. Write down 3 on the sheet of paper. And you write down 3. And then they ask you during the practice session, okay, I want you to say no to every single question. Did you write down the number 1? No. Did you write down the number 2? No. Did you write down the number 3? No. But you actually did write down the number 3. So that's a lie. Did you write down the number 4? No. Did you write down the number 5? No. So now they have a baseline and they can tell that you lied to the third. And they can also see if maybe your stress level is going up, anticipating because you know that question about the number 3 is coming because you can look over the horizon. So then they have the baseline, the control question then about a Kash Patel, about the deputy director or the director. And have you ever said anything bad? It was most likely, we want you to say yes, even if it's true or not true. And they were establishing the baseline. Now, is that a good control question? No. If anything, it seems like the polygrapher asking that question might be somebody who needs to be questioned. Is that someone who's trying to create a fake news story? Is that the news story within this news story? Could there be some dissension within the ranks, even the people who are supposed to be administering a lie detector test? Maybe that's why Dan Bongino didn't have to take a lie detector test, because the polygraphers aren't trusted. by the top echelon, by the top leaders at our preeminent premier law enforcement agency, which would seem to be yet another big story that should probably be fleshed out. So you see how you go down the rabbit hole here, one story to the next, and then you're able to find out where the real story is, and not just the ticky tack Twitter battling. But that doesn't actually give a full pass to the co-deputy director of the FBI. Just stop talking about it. You even acknowledge that talking about it created more eyeballs on it. So you know what you're doing is a mistake, and yet you still did it. Now, hopefully, more people than just at Real Steve Friend actually followed the links, but I'm not going to hold my breath on that one. And now you might have a significant portion of the American people who are under the false belief that it was required for you to take the lie detector test and that you actually didn't pass the lie detector test or you didn't get a full background check. Completely unforced error. All you had to do was be straight and honest, or the preferable option was don't say anything at all because nobody really reads the Daily Mail. Okay, we can pivot now. This is a DOJ story, and this is about the President of the United States, the current occupant of the Oval Office, not the human Roomba, Joe Biden, whose I believe presidential photograph is the auto pen, which is a troll. But this comes from NBC News, and it is about the auto pen, but it pertains to Donald Trump, president. Headline: Justice Department quietly replaced identical Trump signatures on recent pardons. Now, according to this piece, these were, I believe, 7 different pardons that Donald Trump signed. The DOJ posted these pardons online bearing identical copies of Trump's signature, which is impossible. If you're a handwriting expert, would tell you that nobody's signature is the exact same every time unless you're using the auto pen. The DOJ spokesman said the website was updated after a technical error where one of the signatures that President Trump personally signed was mistakenly uploaded multiple times. Now, is that true? Is it not? I don't know. I think what it comes out is that they probably used an auto pen, but even if they didn't, that's not really the issue. The issue when it comes to the auto pen and the malfeasance attached to it was whether or not the guy whose name was being signed was actually approving of what was being signed. And that's been investigated by Congress, and that's been recommended that it be brought forward by the DOJ against Joe Biden because they looked at it and said, this guy was completely demented, had no awareness of what was happening, and the people that were around him were using the auto pen to effectively be in the shadows as a fake president. Now, Donald Trump, he's coming up on 80. I don't think he's buying any green bananas anytime soon. But at the same time, you cannot dispute that he has his mental faculties around him. So it could have been a technical issue. It could have been the auto pen. They just, as the NBC wants to do because they're a communist, leftist, Marxist rag, throw some shade at the auto pen and say, oh, see, both sides do it. We should just dismiss this entirely. And that's the story. The story is that we're going to get a full court press when it comes to this, which I think means that the leftist, Marxist, communist news in this country thinks it's a significant chance that that will bear fruit when the DOJ brings forward some sort of a, I don't know, prosecution or an inquiry about the auto pen if somebody was using it inappropriately. I don't think NBC News drops the story unless they're fearful. So I'll correct myself. I still don't think anything is going to happen when it comes to the auto pen. But if I'm wrong, I'll be the first to formally acknowledge that I was wrong on this hobbyist podcast. But at the same time, reading into these stories and finding out where the weaknesses are, you push where there's mush. I think that NBC News, at least, thinks that there could be something there. All right, let's now go to the New York Times when it comes to Border Patrol. So I want to go back to that and do again a deep dive issue on this one and finding out where the real story is. So the headline here is, in one day, Border Patrol arrested 81 people in Charlotte, North Carolina. This is a big bust that happened in this biggest city, I believe, for North Carolina. So looking at it, and this will connect to one story, to another, and it is important to actually take the time to do it. The operation has startled people in one of the fastest growing cities in the country, whose growth in recent years has been spurred by international migration, especially from Latin America. So, New York Times, at one point, a newspaper, is calling illegal aliens international migration. And they give you a couple of numbers here. And again, I'm a numbers guy, so right away they jumped out to me. Now, according to the New York Times, more than 50,000 immigrants, you mean illegal aliens, have moved to the county, which is Mecklenburg County, which is where Charlotte is, since 2020. What happened in 2020? Oh, that's right. We had a presidential election where we went to bed and one guy was in the lead, and then we woke up and the other guy was in the lead, and then we found out that they boarded up the windows while they were counting. And then we had the Biden administration, aka the auto pen administration, for 4 years, where they let in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 million illegal aliens. So since that time, over the last 5 years, they have had 50,000 illegals come to the county. There are currently about 200,000 foreign born residents there. It's increased 22% since 2020. Now, what is the total number of people that live in the county, Mecklenburg, where Charlotte is the main hub? There's about 1.2 million, which means that 1 in 6 people, 1 in 6 is foreign born, and I would wager a healthy amount that most of them are illegal. 1 in 6. If you live on a regular suburban street, what are there? 12 houses? Are you telling me that if you go outside, you live in the burbs, and you look to your left, you look to your right, you look at the houses, and you realize that if you look to your left, one of those houses, you look to your right, another one of those houses are completely occupied by illegal aliens? That's the reality that exists there. It's not a big deal. It's completely not a sea change, a cultural shift. The melting pot is completely intact here. It's not like we're dealing with more of a borscht than a melting pot. A borscht where you have different aggregate parts that never really commingle together. The melting pot is completely intact. And again, to the New York Times in the same piece, Department of Homeland Security has not said exactly how many of the 81 people they arrested had criminal histories. All of them, they all entered the country illegally, New York Times. Few of the hundreds of people who were arrested in Chicago and Los Angeles operations had serious criminal backgrounds. I love the words serious criminal background. So if you're in Charlotte, it just had to be any criminal background. But because so many of them in Los Angeles and Chicago had criminal backgrounds, they had to add the qualifier of being serious. Sorry, I'm not going to leave it up to the New York Times to tell me what is and isn't serious, particularly when they don't think that walking across our border as your first overt act upon coming into our country constitutes a crime. Now, the people who were arrested or approached by agents on Saturday, they said, included a man participating in a church cleanup day. Oh, he's just a good Christian. Workers at Home Depot. Oh, illegals working illegally under the table. A landscaper putting up Christmas decorations. He's an illegal working illegally, and he's a Christian, don't you know? And then one more, a Hispanic U.S. citizen whose truck window was shattered by an agent. So now these brown shirts, these Gestapo, they're going around against U.S. citizens just because they have brown skin. Don't you know that Department of Homeland Security, Border Patrol Operations, ICE, they're secret racists, according to the New York Times, or at least insinuated in this piece. And that's all they hope that you get from it. They hope you don't dig in a little bit deeper on it, because that would be a problem for their narrative. But unfortunately, I did. And I actually went to a source that I don't believe that they hoped I did, which was them, the New York Times. So the adjoining sister piece to it. Headline, U.S. Border Patrol launches operation in Charlotte. It's unclear how long the operation will last in North Carolina's largest city, which is a growing immigrant population. And I really just went to it because I wanted to find out about this truck window. This American citizen, he had his truck smashed just because he had brown skin? Or was there some sort of mitigating or aggravating circumstance here that necessitated a deeper dive, pulling back a little bit of the onion layers? Now, the American citizen's name is Willie. Willie was heading to breakfast before driving to a construction job when agents approached him in the parking lot. They asked him if he was a U.S. citizen, and Willie, who lived in Charlotte for more than 24 years, became a citizen around 6 years ago. So for 18 years, he was an illegal alien. He engaged in a playful, as it's described by the New York Times, a playful back and forth with the agents in an effort to provide cover for migrants, aka illegal aliens, in the area who may not have had documentation. So this jackass just tried to delay the ICE agents who said, hey, are you a citizen or not? And he went back and forth and tried to keep them distracted so that all the other illegal aliens could run away. So he's providing aid and comfort to people who have committed legal violations by entering our country illegally. So he's not just a citizen who was going to get breakfast one day. And what did he say? Oh, his quote was, "You want me to take breakfast with me? I'll pay." He said, "It's just chuckle hot here." He's just having a good time with those agents who are out there trying to enforce the law, knowing that they're going to be interfacing with people who do have criminal histories. Some of them, as the New York Times would say, serious criminal histories, and they can't afford to be distracted. But they resolved the situation. There was no sort of hoopla, no fireworks, and those agents went away. But then we had some more agents come up, and Willie tried to distract them again and not answer their questions. And that's when they lost patience and broke his window and went in there and did their job. I'm sorry, you're obstructing. You were there and you were actually admitting to the New York Times at one point, a newspaper, that you were actively obstructing a law enforcement investigation. You're actively obstructing the ICE agents from apprehending illegal aliens. I thought you were a US citizen. I thought you took an oath to our Constitution. You agreed to be part of our melting pot. But instead, you came in as a subversive. Willie needs to have his citizenship revoked. Willie needs to be sent back to wherever he came from 24 years ago. He's been in Charlotte this entire time. I'm sure he's just melted right into that climate and that culture there at Charlotte. And Charlotte, as the New York Times lets us know, they have a relatively, what do they say? Oh, a moderate Democrat-led city more than 1,000 miles away from the Mexican border. So ergo, Border Patrol has no business being in Charlotte. They should just leave it alone, even though they were able to apprehend 81 illegal aliens in one day. But Charlotte's just moderate. They're like your grandfather's Democrat. Maybe they believe in a little bit more taxes, maybe a little bit more regulations. But I mean, they're basically Bill Clinton there, right? Right? Well, we got to keep digging in more. So I went to Charlotte's own city website, where Charlotte for All resources for new Americans. They're very excited and very happy to be recognized as a certified welcoming city, not a sanctuary city, a certified welcoming city, because they're not brave enough to go all the way out on the limb and say, ollie, oxen for you if you're an illegal alien. But what are we going to do for you here? What are we going to use American taxpayer dollars via sales tax and property tax and income tax? What are we going to use those dollars for? Well, we're going to ensure that immigrants, aka illegal aliens, have access to economic opportunities. So we'll get them jobs, maybe working at construction sites. We're going to promote civic engagement among illegal aliens, encouraging them to participate in city governance. Oh, do you mean the government that they can't vote to have representation in? We're going to want them involved, so we're probably going to get them to vote illegally. And we're going to provide equitable access to city services. So the tax dollars that are supposed to go back to the citizens for things like education or healthcare, maybe public safety like fire and police, we're going to make sure that those go to the illegal aliens, because we are, after all, a certified welcoming city. And that is an actual designation. I went and found the certified cities that are out there. It's 36 cities. It includes these blood red conservative hotbeds like Austin, Texas, Baltimore, Detroit, Philadelphia, New Orleans, Pittsburgh. Just middle America, totally not communists who are voting for their own demise. Charlotte counts itself among their ranks as they're continuing to just shovel American tax dollars out the door to the illegal aliens, and they're proud of it. But they're moderate, according to the New York Times. And then just as a callback to the original piece, and the headline for those as a refresher, as you dig deep, it's as you go down through these various rabbit holes and you find out more just how bad things actually are, you might be distracted from the original problem that caught my eye. And the headline caught my eye. The headline is, in one day, Border Patrol arrested 81 people in Charlotte, North Carolina. Well, backslaps and helmet stickers and attaboys all around for the Department of Homeland Security. 81 people. 81 people in one day, times 365 days in 1 year, times 4 years, which will be one presidential administration, equals 118,000 arrests. Not deportations, just arrests. 118,000. Folks, we got 30, 40, or 50 million of them. It's a drop in the ocean. Not good enough. Okay, we can go over now, get off of the illegal aliens, and let's though give an acknowledgement to what the Marxist leftist communists are, aka Democrat Party, is actually coming around to. I mean, you remember a year ago where there was a talking point that Democrats had completely lost the plumb line with the American citizen. They just didn't know how to connect to them. They were screaming to them about toxic masculinity and how we had to cut off the balls of every little kid to make Harry into a Sally, and things were nonsensical. I think they might have got their groove back on this one. So from Wired, not a right-wing source, the headline is, the data center resistance has arrived. This is worth digging into, not just because there's any sort of secrets here, but because I think too many people on the political right are still high on the hog and thinking they won the Super Bowl a year ago and didn't pay attention to the most recent elections and thought, oh, midterms will go just fine for us. I'm not really worried about it. Meanwhile, Democrats have caught on to something. They're hopped on a surfboard, and this is a wave that can push them pretty far onto the beach. Now, the background for this is that Georgia, state of Georgia, where you could go to trueearth.co. They're a Georgia firm, Georgia company, trueearth.co. All right. Georgia has become a hotspot for a data center development over the last few years. It's also now a nexus for organizing against those same data centers. Georgia voters, they actually elected this guy who's a Democrat. His name is Peter Hubbard. He became the state's Public Service Commission. He ran on rising utility costs. Now, why are utility costs going up? Well, they're going up for lots of different reasons. But one of the big reasons is these data centers. Similarly, the now governor-elect Abigail Spanberger, who will tell you that she used to be a government agent and therefore she gets to take away all your guns. Abigail Spanberger said during her campaign that she wanted data centers to pay their own way for power. Well, that sounds actually eminently reasonable. Now, with the exception of a few more prominent, well-known Republican elected officials, I think it's Josh Hawley, Tom Massey, Marjorie Greene, they've become critics of these data centers getting built up there. But our president, who's mean orange and literally Hitler, he wants the data centers to continue to be constructed. And they're being sold to these municipalities, these counties, even these states as a net plus. Think about all the jobs it's going to create. It's going to bring in a lot of income to the area. It's going to get circulated around. Think of all the property taxes. But these data centers are just giant, enormous warehouses, which have to be kept very cold because of the computing capability that's inside them. It has to be kept cold. They suck up a ton of electricity. But because they're a net plus, they're creating all these jobs. They're bringing all this money. They're getting the first bite of the apple when it comes to the electric supply that we have. We have a finite amount of electricity. They're getting the first bite of it, which means that there's not as much there, which means that the rest of the people are competing, or at least the demand for it is going to reach a point where maybe the supply isn't there, and that will cause electric bills to go up. It becomes more expensive. Supply and demand, basic economics. And the Democrats have caught on to that. There's righteous indignation about people saying, hey, look, I'm from this area. You're telling me that an outsider comes in here and lays down a warehouse, and now my electricity bills have just gone up through the roof? And look, the data backs it up. This comes from utilitydive.com, and it's a projection in the next couple of years. Electricity prices to continue to rise all the way into 2026. They're expected to go up about 2.5% next year, and that's the same as this year. So from this year to next year, you're telling me that you're going to have a 5% nationwide increase in electricity bills? And that doesn't even specify particular areas like down in Texas, where the electricity bills are spiking way more than that. I mean, they're on track to spike 10% in the next 2 years. Meanwhile, the leaders that are at the helm of the ship here are saying, no, it's all fine. We're creating all these great opportunities, and Americans are just going to have to tighten the belt. It could be good times, could be bad times. We're not sure, but the companies out there like the Metas of the world, they're investing hundreds of billions of dollars, and we just can't turn down that sweet cash, even if it means that the American people are going to have to pay the price for skyrocketing electricity costs, which has not been articulated. I think it's inevitable at this point, and that's the story. It is an inevitability. It is going to happen, and nobody's talking about it. Well, the Democrats are going to do what they do best, and they're going to identify the target of ire. And even though they're never going to fix the problem, I mean, I'm sure that the Spanbergers of the world or whoever is going to run a Democrat ticket, they're going to take lots of money from the Metas, which are throwing down billions to build these data centers. They'll be happy to take that money, but there'll be a nice little agreement. And they'll say, hey, look, we're going to have to villainize you a little bit so that the masses vote for us, even though we won't change anything. The play is to be clear with the American people that they should expect these things to happen. And then we need to talk about how we're going to address the power shortages that are going to happen. How are we going to bring in a greater supply? Are we going to drill, baby, drill? Or are we going to push back on these data centers one way or another and say, look, we're going to reject the construction of these sites, even though there is a promise of additional tax revenue? It's not worth it. The juice is not worth the squeeze to our citizenry. All of those things need to be fleshed out, but they're not. And the Democrats are smart. They're going to glom onto it. They're going to ride that surfboard all the way to some modicum of electoral success. And when they do get there, you can bet that we're going to course correct in their perspective when it comes to murdering babies, which is the subject of the next one, where we have to dig deep into the story. And it comes from NPR. It comes from their, as they call it, goats and soda section, which is a thing. I did not want to dig into that because it sounded retarded. But the headline is, a stock of U.S. bought birth control meant for sub-Saharan Africa goes bad in Belgium. Yes, I got a headache from that as well. I'll read it one more time. A stock of U.S. bought birth control meant for sub-Saharan Africa goes bad in Belgium. So we bought a bunch of abortion pills to send to Africa, and they got held up. Let's find out what happened. So along with dismantling USAID, so NPR is going to throw in with USAID because they both got cut by the Department of Government Efficiency, the DOGE. Apart from dismantling USAID earlier this year, the U.S. specifically halted family planning programs, i.e. abortions, for which it had long been the world's largest bilateral donor, because it did not consider them life-saving, despite vast evidence showing such services reduce maternal and newborn deaths. So aborting babies reduces the number of newborn deaths. You're going to need to square that circle for me. If every newborn dies before they're born, I think that it actually would go down. But again, I'm a numbers guy. Sorry, NPR. But as a result, shipment of contraceptives that had been earmarked for girls and women in Congo, Kenya, Mali, Tanzania, and Zambia ended up stranded in Belgium. Your government's too big. It spends too much money. And this is actually an initiative the Trump administration tried to rein this in. We shouldn't be sending condoms and birth control to sub-Saharan Africa. We're supposed to be America first. Several aid groups tried to buy and redistribute the supplies, but the U.S. rejected those offers. And they said they actually planned to incinerate those products, but they didn't, which gives NPR and the global initiative to kill as many Black babies in Africa as possible from these fake do-gooder leftist Marxist groups. They were very excited. Maybe they could get another crack at aborting those babies. Authorities in Belgium confirmed that in addition to 4 truckloads worth of unexpired birth control sitting in a warehouse, another 20 truckloads were stored improperly and unusable. Now, the final quote, before we go down a pretty deep rabbit hole here on this whole, we'll find out, sexual and reproductive health and rights profession. That's a thing. The quote from the NPR piece comes from Chiara Cosentino. She's a coordinator for Countdown 2030 Europe, a coalition of European reproductive rights organizations. And the quote was, this was the Trump administration's apparent strategy is to let these life-saving supplies expire rather than share them with those who need and want them. I don't even need to have an abortion debate. I don't want any of my tax dollars going to any country for any reason at all. That's called being America first. That's called being America only. Now, that aside, let's go into the baby murder, because this woman, again, she came from this group called Countdown 2030 Europe, which I went to because that is my nature on the program at Real Steve Friend. He is an investigator at heart. Countdown2030europe.org. You see the homepage there, which reads out for those who are listening, acting together for sexual and reproductive freedom across the globe strengthens our society as a whole. Think about how we would be a strengthened society if we murdered all the babies. I went a little bit further and found out just how communist this was because I went to their In Focus page, which is some good eating. The headline here is the decoloniality. I think it's decolonization is what this word is derivative of, which is a Marxist intersectional term. The decoloniality of SRHR. What the heck are they even talking about? So SRHR is sexual and reproductive health and rights. We find out that according to this Countdown 2030 Europe, they believe that they can overcome global challenges they face today only through collective action and international solidarity, which means that they have to murder all the babies. Now, from this particular element of their website, as these SRHR, sexual, reproductive health, and rights professionals aspire to take on an intersectional, anti-racist, and decolonial approach, so all of the terms, we must confront the colonial history that has characterized the field of sexual and reproductive health over the past century and murder all the babies. Now, the last quote here is, from subjugating and abusing colonized people, including through forced abortions, sterilizations, and unethical experiments, often in the name of population control or medical advancement, to imposing population control and coercive family planning tactics on global majority people in an effort to reach so-called sustainable fertility rate targets. That's a lot of words. That is not a complete sentence. There's no verb in the entire thing. But they did try to characterize what they're doing, which is murdering all the babies, as an effort to push back on, how do they characterize it? Forced abortions and sterilizations. So they indicate to you that they want to save all the babies by murdering all the babies. This is why you actually have to read the fine print. These organizations exist out there. This is in Europe, so it's technically not even something you should worry about as an American taxpayer. I tried to find what I could on it. It looks like all the funding does come from European countries to the tune of about $3.35 billion that they're throwing out there. So that's good news. They can buy all the contraceptives that they want. They don't have to use any of the condoms or birth control from the United States because we're not sending it over there anymore. Okay. Now let's go back to America, back over across the pond, and talk about some financial matters here, which are concerning to me. And I do think they're worth going into as we're digging deep and projecting what really are the stories here. This comes from VantageScore.com, and it relates to auto loans and their delinquencies because people are not paying their car payments because they got to tighten their belt. So from VantageScore, the headline is, auto loan delinquencies increased over 50% in the last 15 years since 2010. Auto loan delinquencies have now evolved from being one of the least risky consumer credit products to one of the most risky. More delinquencies on this ahead of credit cards and home mortgages. All these things have now actually taken a backseat to auto loans. People are winding up when they have too much month at the end of the money and they got to pick which bill they're going to pay. They're paying for the mortgage. They're not paying for the car. Now, why would that be? Now, we can only surmise, but I think if we use a little bit of deductive reasoning. Now, auto loan, they try to throw out what is it? It's not auto loan. It's a VantageScore. Sorry. VantageScore tries to throw out some possible reasons why people can't afford to pay for the car payments anymore. They say cars are more expensive now. There's a higher financing cost. The interest rates are going up. Auto insurance is going up and repair costs are going up. I think it's a little bit more even simple than that. What does an automobile truly represent? The transportation, the ability to get to work. Now, we exist in a very virtual society right now. Some people are able to work from home. I don't think those are the people that are not making their car payments. I think that people are making an active decision that there's too much month at the end of the money. I have to pick what I'm going to do. I'm not getting evicted. I'm not letting the bank take my house. I need a roof over my head. I'm going to pay that. But I'm going to let them take the car because if I need to, if I really need to, I don't need to go to work. Uncle Sam will come in and give me a nice stimmy check. Uncle Sam will come in and pay for my grocery bills, which is an adjoining piece that will marry to these auto loan delinquencies because you have this incredibly high number of people that are just letting the cars go away, and Snap is under some sort of review now. Well, is there going to be more due diligence? Well, that's a good thing. But at the same time, I think as we dig into this story, which is about some due diligence over from SNAP, this Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, food stamps, there's more of a story there that we need to be aware of. The headline comes from The Blaze. Trump administration drops hammer on SNAP scammers after finding 186,000 dead people collecting benefits, and actually was able to find a video of it. This is she's the Secretary of Agriculture because they're in charge of the food stamps. This is Secretary Collins being asked about it, and we'll give her a play.
Here in February, the very first thing I did was send letters to every single state in America and said, never before has the federal government asked for the data, but it is a new day. President Trump is the president. We know there's a lot of fraud. We need to help partner with you all to figure out how to make sure that this money and these benefits go to those who truly need it and not rife with fraud and corruption. 29 states, mostly the red states, responded with their data sets February, March, April. So the numbers that you're talking through, those are numbers that we have been collecting and analyzing since early summer, late spring. Okay. The fact that this spotlight shined on SNAP has allowed us to talk about it. But here's the most unbelievable news I have really just over the last few days, that 5,000 dead people, that was just 1 month. The number is closer to 186,000 deceased men and women and children in this country are receiving a check. Now, that is what we're really going to start clamping down on. 500,000 are getting 2. But here's the really stunning thing. This is just data from those 29 mostly red states. Can you imagine when we get our hands on the blue state data, what we're going to find? It's going to give us a platform and a trajectory to fundamentally rebuild this program, have everyone reapply for their benefit, make sure that everyone that's taking a taxpayer-funded benefit through SNAP or food stamps, that they literally are vulnerable and they can't survive without it. And
literally, Madam Secretary, no, do better. But I don't want to be too pedantic. Did you catch something else that was in there? Yeah, the 186,000 dead people, that's a pretty big concern. But then she had a throwaway line about a minute in. She said, oh, and the 500,000 people getting 2. So you're telling me not 186, 500,000 people were getting 2 SNAP checks? That seems like the headline. Well, why are you talking about that? I'm glad you're going to go do some due diligence. You're going to make people reapply. You're going to hopefully be a little bit more honest with it. But 186, because they're dead, it sounds really flashy and get the headline out of it. You're giving 500,000 people 2 SNAP checks? How much is a SNAP benefit? How much is it for the year? Well, I looked it up. It's roughly what? $2,268. I mean, it's not life-changing. $2,200. That means that the American people, you and me, we spent over $1 billion more than we had to on the SNAP benefits for those 500,000 people. They double dipped. That's a big news story. Why isn't that front and center? And then there was another video that I want to throw out there when it comes to just sort of like catching my ear, the big stories that we just have throwaways, and it even pertains to the SNAP benefits. This was a news story out of New York City when there was this concern that SNAP was going to be canceled. And we'll just get beyond the fact that everybody in the video is morbidly obese and definitely not that hungry. See if you can catch on this one.
It's really bad.
Danielle Grant is starving.
I know. I'm trying to see if I can get some food because we literally don't have anything to eat today or tomorrow. So we're going to try to make ends meet, and we can.
Desperate for food, nowhere to go. Grant and many others got to the Hope Line today just to make an appointment to come back later in the week for food. Resources are slim, leaving 40% of Bronxites without money to feed themselves. Some still in shock.
We heard things before, but it's like, they're not going to let people starve. That's ridiculous, but it's like, no, that's literally like what's happening.
We hope the food pantries may.
Literally. No. 40% of people in the Bronx, that's one of the 5 boroughs of New York City. 40% of them are on food stamps. How many people live in the Bronx? I looked it up. It's over 1 million people. So we are at 1.3 million people living in the Bronx. That would be 544,000 on food stamps in America's biggest city. The Big Apple. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. Apparently, you can't make it without government assistance. That's a massive story. Just throwaway line. Not going to worry about it. We'll just make sure that the morbidly obese woman who's spent hundreds of dollars on her fake hair can misuse the word literally and then go ahead and get her benefits. I wonder if she's getting 2 benefits. Now, look, I don't want to give her too hard of a time. I feel bad for people who are on tough times. I don't want the safety net to become a hammock, as it likely is in places like the Bronx, where 40% of people are on the dole. But if you have a hard time, I understand that. Maybe you can't make your car payment, something to that effect. You're short on cash, too much month at the end of the money. Well, good news. We've already talked about it, but it's worth going into because we got an update. Stimmy checks are coming, guys. We're really excited. President of the United States, proud to announce that you're going to be going to get your $2,000 tariff dividend.
They spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a fake deal called the Inflation Reduction Act. That was made up money. When I pay people $2,000 each for low and moderate income and middle income people, everybody but the rich get this. That's not made up. That's real money.
Low to moderately income people, he says $100,000 is low income. So maybe our billionaire president might be a little bit disconnected from what constitutes low income people at the same time. But throw the numbers at you. Let's just, as a nice refresher, remind everybody that in 2020, when you were told to stay home and stay safe and shut down your non-essential business that you use to feed your family, unless you're on SNAP benefits, and pay your mortgage, unless you're letting that go because you already let the car go, you got $1,200. Now, $1,200 to every American citizen cost our government roughly $300 billion. Now, the president of the United States is saying he wants to give everybody $2,000, not $1,200, $2,000, which estimates are putting somewhere in the area between $400 and $600 billion. Well, I mean, if you're flush with cash, if you got it, let's just distribute it. It's just a dividend after all, right? Those tariffs that we've implemented on other countries that are totally paying the tariffs, they're definitely not raising their prices so that the American people have to pay more for those exact same goods. It's not like you're paying the tariff, which is then going to be refunded to you slightly in the form of $2,000, which will cause more money to circulate in the system, which will cause the money that you've saved and sequestered away in your bank account to become worth less and worth less because more money is chasing those same amount of goods. And then that worthless money becomes worthless. Well, now it'll cost $600 billion, but we're flush with cash because of all the tariff revenue we've had coming in over the last year, which is $190 billion. So we're going to go into debt to give everybody $2,000. that sounds like a really terrible plan that nobody's thought through. Nobody's actually dug into the details of, but it sounds good. So we want that headline. We want that story. And they're hoping that you don't dig in and realize that maybe it's going to be a little bit more pain attached to it. Or maybe it's not even as automatic as is being represented there on Air Force One when the president's talking to the media, because his own Secretary of Treasury, Scott Bessent, he broke some bad news to everybody. This is about these $2,000 stimulus checks. I mean, tariff dividends coming from Secretary Bessent. He says that those $2,000 checks would actually need a vote from Congress, which would not likely be able to do that. So I guess it's a lot of conversation about something that's not going to wind up being an issue. I would like to see it, though, become a conversation, because I would like the story to be that people who we elected and put into positions of power to make massive decisions for the country that will determine our future, our kids' future, for years and years to come, would think through these matters and say, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Our tariffs brought in $190 billion and we spend that in 10 days, but we're going to go into debt over $500 billion to give people a couple $1,000. And when we do that, the inflation will go so bad that they're all going to get on SNAP benefits. Seems like the story is a failure to think about second and third order consequences to bad decisions, because we just got to have that sugar rush. We just got to get that good headline and hope they don't read into it or click on the links that brings you to more details and more information that makes you more aware of the problems that actually exist. All right. I want to finish it out. I got one more story. And it wasn't necessarily in keeping with the digging deeper, but I think I can square this circle here and put a bow on it today. So this is a blast from the past. Rose Lopez, you're going to have to dig through the archives. It wasn't that long ago. I believe it was on a Saturday show where he talked about the beneficial blood sucking. It comes from these Marxist, leftist, communist scientists. And it was about how they wanted to get people this allergy. They wanted to use a tick bite from the Lone Star tick to spread this syndrome, which is called alpha gall syndrome, AGS, and it basically makes you allergic to red meat. And these scientists, who are the experts, the guys who think that they're gods of the entire society, they actually wanted people to be infected with it so that we wouldn't eat meat. This was their solution. I mean, who would ever think that anything bad could happen, right? They wanted to promote tick-borne alpha gall syndrome as an obligatory thing. They should make everybody allergic to red meat. It was a moral imperative. And at the time, I remember saying, people are going to die from this. They can say all they want that it's not deadly. No, I mean, this would be a safe and effective way to do it, to reduce the amount of meat consumption there. And back to NPR. Headline: a red meat allergy caused by ticks killed a New Jersey man. Here's what to know. Now, they try to give you the scare tactics because that's what NPR is going to do. They want to make sure that if it bleeds, it leads, and people are going to be super scared and they'll stay and clicking on NPR stories. But the report is that a 47-year-old airline pilot in New Jersey fell ill a couple hours after eating a hamburger, and he died of an allergic reaction. It came out that he thought he'd gotten bit by some chiggers over the summer, but it actually wound up being these ticks. And they left these little bumps there. He contracted AGS, alpha gall syndrome, and without knowing it, wound up perishing as a result of it. Now, how does this pertain to digging deeper and finding out more all the details? Well, you dig deeper and you find out that Real Steve Friend was right all along. All right, guys, we've reached the end for today's program here on the American Radicals podcast, but we're going to send you off on a nice biblical worldview and with a fun palate cleanse. So I'm going to go to 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 7. But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." I think we can even relate to what we talked about today. Headlines don't say it all. You're going to have to dig in deeper to the meat and potatoes, the heart of the argument. And that pertains to media scare and care tactics when it pertains to illegal aliens. There's more story there. And our robust response to illegal aliens and deporting them away from our country is not everything it's cracked up to be. It gets ramped up. We need to have more of it. There are expert opinions on health they're all kind of related to population control. We're told that we need life-saving birth control, which will stop babies from dying, and the birth control happens to be killing babies. Or they want to infect you with some sort of tick-borne illness that is going to be safe and effective until you eat a hamburger. And then digging deeper into government stimulus checks and how there are downstream consequences. You need to have second and third order thinking there. You don't need to just rely on the headlines. And we can now go to our palate cleanse for the day, which isn't really related to anything else. I just thought it was funny. These are some examples of women who think that they're being hit on, and really it's all just a mistake.
Hello?
I got a boyfriend. Oh my god, I'm so sorry. You're on your phone? Jesus, I thought you were
Babe.
to me. Oh my god, I'm so
Babe, let me just call you.
You need a spot with that?
No, I got a boyfriend. Bye, go. What's this? Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh, help me, push it up, push it up, push it up.
Boyfriend!
Hello? Hey, hello? Bro, what are you doing?
I'm so sorry.
I was talking on the phone like... Hello?
I have a boyfriend.
Hello?
I have a boyfriend.
Hello?
I have a...
Oh, you're in the back? Okay.
Wait, hold on. Hold on, excuse me? Can I have your number?
I'm on the phone with my girlfriend.
Be careful, ladies. Pay attention to your surroundings there. I'm not saying that they're not trying to play with you, but at the same time, maybe he's just being a good boyfriend trying to meet up with his girl in the back. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us today on the American Radicals podcast. Be back with you Thursday, 10:30 Eastern time on rumble.com/amradpod and on YouTube, the American Radicals podcast, Spotify, iHeart, iTunes, at X American News, all over the place, expanding out the brand. Please share it with a friend or 12. Do all the things. And until then, guys, have a great day.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amradpod.